Bon Jovi with Legendary. Welcome back. It is the Country Viewpoint here on your colour of country life, Flow FM. Time to now go to the federal member for Mayo, Rebekha Sharkie, who joins me on the line, fresh out of being in Canberra. Great to have you on the show, Rebekha. How are you?
Yeah, look, good to be back home in my electorate.
All right. Well, I'm sure that exact sentence has been said in some close quarters with regards to Julian Assange in more recent times. Of course, his homecoming certainly highly publicised. Tell us all about this, because you've been involved in the sort of background on this in many respects with the Bring Julian Assange Home parliamentary group. So obviously a very nice scene for you to witness with Julian Assange stepping onto the Australian tarmac for the first time in, I think, 12 years, was it not?
Yeah, very long time. Look, I mean, I think it doesn't matter, where you sit on the Julian Assange matter. It is an Australian who for a very long time was not charged with any offences, who's not found guilty of anything, and was locked inside Belmarsh prison, which I'm not sure if all of you listeners know, but I mean, this is, one of the worst, most notorious prisons in the United Kingdom, and he was in there in solitary confinement for many significant parts. So for me, I probably started getting involved in the Julian Assange issue and whistleblower protection more generally, probably about 6 months after entering the Parliament, so probably in about early 2017, I really turned my mind to Julian Assange and Bernard Collaery, and we had Witness K at the time. And really, for me, what I was concerned about was that, Julian Assange was, potentially prosecuted extraterritorially, so by the United States, without setting foot in the United States, and without having the protections of the United States Constitution, the freedom of speech, that is something that is a protection really for all United States people. And you would think anyone who is also being charged with a United States crime. So that was the real concern for me. And I guess that really long delay. So I've been part of that for a number of years. I think Andrew Wilkie, who I sit next to, started the formal group in 2019. And the first time we all got together, we could all fit into one small room, and there were people from the super far left and the Greens, and then there were people like George Christensen and people from what you would consider the very right of the Parliament. And yet all coming, and Barnaby Joyce, and yet all coming together to say, hang on, this is an Australian citizen, are we doing enough for this person? Anyway, it's good to see that the Australian government worked across diplomatic channels to get him home via a remote island that's US territory, and he's now back in Australia. My hope is that him and his family can now, he's got children he really hasn't lived with, that he can connect and they can, with his wife, and they can have a peaceful, happy time in Australia.
Federal member for Mayo, Rebekha Sharkie. Will speak more with her about the current state of Julian Assange after the huge ordeal he's been through. After we bring you a weather update from across our Flow FM network, that's up next here on the Country Viewpoint program. Stay tuned. Taylor Swift with Fortnight, and welcome back. It is the Country Viewpoint here on a Tuesday afternoon on Flow FM. Joining me on the line is Rebekha Sharkie, the federal member for Mayo out of South Australia, in our first hour today. Looking at the return of Julian Assange last week to Australian shores. An extraordinary ordeal, there's no doubt about it. We won't really sort of labour on the past, but just going forward, I mean, to think that obviously Julian Assange was living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for that amount of time alone, let alone everything else that he sort of had to deal with. People probably just don't quite understand the gravity of what he's been through, and his wife made that really quite abundantly clear in the media recently.
Look, I mean, it certainly has been. I mean, for a lot of young people, their entire lifetime has been, this person has been either, in solitary confinement, in Belmarsh, or indeed, seeking asylum inside the Ecuadorian embassy. No doubt, though, there has been, and it has certainly grown over the years, but there has been a number of us in the Parliament that have pushed governments, this government, the previous government, to act on behalf of Julian Assange, and he certainly credits the current government with saving his life, the Prime Minister with saving his life. I can't imagine what he's experienced. Certainly, his wife. I've had briefings with his solicitor, his Australian solicitor. His dad has been and his brother have been steadfast in their support, and I think that that's possibly what has got that man through. For me, Julian is a Walkley award-winning journalist, and it sends a bit of a chill, I think, that he experienced what he did when all he did was effectively publish the material that was given to him by a US citizen, Chelsea, who has, who since, has been, they weren't in jail, and they certainly weren't in Belmarsh. But the real concern is around, I think, that many parliamentarians were concerned about was those extraterritorial powers that the US sought to exercise. And really, by him pleading guilty to one count, did exercise that. Now, that sets, I think, a very dangerous precedent around, does that mean the US government can charge an Australian citizen on Australian soil for perhaps, a US crime, that, and then not give the protections of, freedom of speech, which is enshrined in their constitution. And that is where I think, we have to be very concerned about freedom of speech and freedom for freedom of the press, freedom for journalists to do their work. We don't want to see that thwarted in any way.
Let's talk about round one of the Growing Regions program. Why were only 40 out of 311 suitable applications successful? That's a question you posed in Parliament in question time.
Certainly did. So there's a federal government program called Growing Regions, and it came to light during the estimates process that in round one of this, so $300 million that the government set aside, the government chose only 40 out of 311 suitable applications. So they underspent in this program. So they received over $1.4 billion worth of applications, and these were approved, department approved, saying yes, they met the criteria. That was 313 projects. But the government chose to only use $206 million out of that $300 million that was allocated. Now, my concern was that $93 million was just going to go back into general revenue and not be spent to the regions. And so I asked the minister. Obviously, it's frustrating that there's so many really worthy projects across regional Australia that could have gone into that round one that didn't. Only one was approved in Mayo. But pleasingly, the minister has made a commitment in question time that $93 million would be put into round two. So that will effectively be $400 million that will be put into round two. And I'll be keeping a very close eye on this, because I think, it's pretty clear that certainly in my electorate, but right across regional Australia, that the money that was spent and allocated by previous governments, many of that was cut in successive budgets. We did manage to get some money back into Mayo for both Harndorf and Mount Barker freeway interchanges, but right across Australia, a lot of money has been cut and projects cut by the government, and so this is one of those small programs, small $300 million. It's actually a reasonable amount of money per year, per round. But we need to make sure that we see that investment in regional Australia. So that's why I thought that asking the minister was really critical. And I'm pleased that the money isn't lost forever. It's going to be rolled over into round two, and we just need to make sure that those investments come to fruition. Because if you've got $1.4 billion worth of projects that have been approved for potential success to potentially be chosen, that's a lot of very worthy projects around Australia that need some government support.
The government's investment in regional infrastructure, and you've been calling on the government to invest more in regional infrastructure, particularly in your electorate. Tell us, whether we're sort of seeing enough of it right now on the whole.
Well, look, on the whole, we're definitely not seeing enough of it. My electorate was one of the few in the budget that actually got some money into the regions in May when the budget was handed down. Certainly hardly anything went into Indi, which is another independent seat, being, and the challenge is that, the regions carry the heavy trucks, they carry the tourists, so we really need to make sure that our infrastructure meets the needs and also is providing support to make it an attractive place for people to want to move to. We want people to be living in the regions. It's great for the economy. So while I was pleased to see that money returned in the budget in my electorate, I know that right across Australia, lots and lots of very worthy projects were cut. And then, of course, with this program, a new government program, they weren't funded in this round. It kind of beggars belief that you would have such an over-allocation, such demand, and then yet still not spend all the money. I don't know why the government did that, but at least they've said and committed that they're going to put that $93 million into round two, which will top it up to nearly $400 million. But compared to previous investments in the region, that instead of having an M in front of it for million, the previous government did put a lot in with a B in front of it. I'm not dissuaded by this government's what I think short-term thinking on regional investment, but I'm still very much putting together the work now for what do we now need in our community over the next decade, and whether that's looking at transport routes across our community, from down across the Fleurieu to rerouting the trains coming out of the Murraylands. I'm not going to give up on some of those really big regional infrastructure projects that are desperately needed in my community.
All right, well, you spoke there of making regions more attractive for people to move to. Tell us about where we're at the moment in the electorate of Mayo when it comes to housing, obviously in very short supply everywhere, and we're looking at population increases as well in South Australia. So where are we on that?
Well, look, it's still, I think it's eased up a little bit with respect to rentals. I always keep an eye on realestate.com actually and some of those other websites just to see how many rentals are available in my region in different areas. It's certainly very tight on the south coast. There's a bit more in the hills at the moment. And part of it is the fact that, yes, we've, had record migration into Australia, and that's put huge pressure on existing housing stock. The government, to their credit, have put forward a lot of different proposals and programs to deliver more housing. But you can't just click your fingers and a house appear. It needs to be built, and it needs local government to work with state government to release land. And while we've got a lot of land releases around the Mount Barker area in particular, it still takes a long time to get approvals up to build a home if you're looking to build a home. And government this week had some legislation. I supported this legislation around how we can potentially encourage super funds to get involved and I guess you could say more corporate ownership of largely rental stock, which is kind of a bit of a scenario you have across many parts of Europe and even in America, where you will have an organisation that maybe owns 200 units or things like that. I supported that legislation because we just genuinely need to see lots of different kinds of solutions to address the housing shortage. And I'd like to see the government also make it far more attractive for people to look to downsize. There is some measures that make it, particularly for the baby boomer generation, to downsize and perhaps go into retirement villages or onto a smaller block. But I think we can do a lot more in that space to make it more attractive, particularly with respect to how that could potentially affect the pension. Because that's what we want to see. I mean, there's no point. I mean, I look at my parents, they're in a home, they've turned nearly every spare bedroom into a guest room. And really, that that's a family home, and while they love living there, I think if there were more incentives for older people to be able to downsize, I think we'd see a lot more movement and freeing up more family homes as well.
Rebekha Sharkie, the federal member for Mayo, thank you so much for your time on the Country Viewpoint program. We'll speak to you again soon.
Terrific, thank you.